All right, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to OneClass. My name is Kevin. I'm going to be walking you through some economics questions today. A little background about me. I have both a bachelor's and a master's degree in economics, and I work as an economist on a day-to-day basis. I think I got 12 or 13 econ questions queued up here, so what I'm going to do is basically go through the answers provided by our junior tutors and walk you through how they arrive at them and correct them if they're wrong. So we can get going here. Just make sure this is working. Looks like it is. First question is, what is the formula for cross-price elasticity? And what are junior tutors written? Is it the formula for cross-price elasticity is the percentage change in quantity demanded of good A divided by the percentage change in the price of good B. So we use kind of this backwards E to denote elasticity. I'm going to subscript a C to denote cross price. And we can say that the percentage change in quantity demanded of good A so if we have the change, I use the triangle delta here to denote change. So we get the percentage change in the quantity demanded of good A divided by the percentage change in the price denoted by P of good B. And this basically shows how responsive the change in quantity demanded of good A is when there's a change in the price of a different good that it's related to. Maybe just to add on to this a little bit, if we have that the cross-price elasticity is greater than 1, then we can say it is elastic. If we've got a cross-price elasticity that is equal to 1, we can say that it is unity elastic. And if we've got a cross-price elasticity that is less than 1, we can say that it is inelastic. So if it were inelastic in this case, then it would mean that if the price of good B was changed, there would not be much of a change in the quantity demanded of good A. If it were unit elastic, that would mean if there was a change in the price of good B, there would be a proportional change in the quantity demanded of good A. And lastly, if the percentage change in the price, if there was a change in the price of good B, if it were elastic, then it would mean that there was a large change in the quantity demanded of good A. Don't think I have too much else to add to that one, so I will say answer, that's correct. We can move on to question 2. Question 2 reads, what is the formula for economic profit? And our junior tutor has written that profits, or simply accounting profits, are defined as the difference between the revenue that the firm earns from selling its output and the cost of producing that output. In other words, excess of revenue over costs, explicit and implicit, is what we call pure profits or economic profits. I think they try to use pi to denote profits here, which is pretty standard in economics. So they've written that pi equals total revenue minus total cost, where TR shows the total revenue, TC shows the total cost. And total cost here would include implicit costs and explicit costs. For example, if a company had 10 That was confusingly written. I think they meant 10 million in revenues, or maybe 1 million. I think they meant 1 million in revenues and 650,000 in explicit cost. Its accounting profit would be 350,000. Same company also had 80,000 in implicit or opportunity costs, and its economic profit would be 270 million. So accounting costs are going to equal, essentially accounting costs are, or accounting profits are what you think of when you normally think of profits. So here for accounting, we would say that the profit denoted by pi is equal to the total revenue minus the total cost. And here the total cost is just made up of explicit costs. So this might be things like, so we'll say under this umbrella here, made up of explicit costs. So that might be like the fixed cost that it takes to run the business, and the variable cost is the cost that comes with every unit sold. Economic profits, on the other hand, are also going to be denoted by pi for profits. We've got our total revenues minus our total costs again. But this time our total costs will be made up of both explicit costs we had above here plus implicit costs. So again, explicit costs might be like fixed costs and variable costs. And in addition to what would just be the accounting costs, we need to include implicit costs, which are the opportunity costs. So I'm going to say that that is an excellent answer and a good example. You guys can have a second here to picture that, and we can move on to question 3. Question 3, what is market demand? And what are Janine The Tutor has written? Because it is the sum of the purchase of all the goods a consumer wants at a given price. This is true. So something that's probably important to note is that you can sum across demand curves. I'm doing this by memory, so I may need to look it up at some point. So drawn 3 graphs here. For all of them, quantity will be on the x-axis and price will be on the y-axis. And this first graph will be individual demand 1. And the second graph will be individual demand 2. And those are going to sum to give us our market demand. So for example, if we have, no, please stay there. If, no, that's not where I want to start. So if individual demand 1 is a smaller demand curve, and individual, try that again, individual demand 2 is a bigger demand curve, then what we can do is sum across these 2 demand curves. So up until this quantity, we'll call it 2. This quantity, we'll call it 4. Maybe this price, we'll call it 2. This price, we'll call it 4. It would still be 2 here. Please keep in mind I am doing this off memory, so I will check in a second to make sure I'm doing it right, but I believe I am so far. So for the first 2 goods, we've got the demand from individual 1, as well as the demand from individual 2. And after that point, we've just got the demand from individual 2. So that would look, so I believe, oh, sorry, this should actually be a larger number. So we may have 2, 4, and 6, and I believe it would be a kink demand curve, something like that. I want to make sure I'm doing this right, and if I'm not, I can correct it. Yeah, okay, so I've got that right there. Give you guys a second to take a picture. And I will say, excellent answer, that's correct. With that, we can move on to question 4. Question 4 reads as follows. What is meant by a perfectly competitive market? And our Janine The Tutor has written that a perfectly competitive market is a market structure wherein there are a high number of sellers of a particular commodity, which is homogeneous, and no particular seller can influence the price of the commodity. Sellers in a perfectly competitive market are price takers. There's no barrier to entry or exit the market for sellers in this type of market structure. The buyers of the commodity have full information of the product. Let's assume that factors of production in a perfectly competitive market are fully mobile. There is no transportation cost occurred in this market structure. And that's an excellent answer. They touched on a lot of the things I want to touch on here. So first we will say perfect competition. So there are 6 main characteristics I like to highlight for a perfectly competitive market. First is that we have homogeneous goods, and this is probably the most important part. This means that every firm in the market is selling the exact same good. An example I usually give is if you go to the grocery store and you want to buy some mushrooms, and some mushrooms are priced at $4 and some are priced at $2, you're obviously going to buy the $2 ones because they're mushrooms and there's not really a difference by firm. I say that this is probably the most important because this is what separates it from a monopolistic competition. And monopolistic competition is almost the same as perfect condition, except the goods are differentiated. An example of that would be like the restaurant industry, where if you're selling burgers, you know, McDonald's is going to sell you a cheap version of the burger, and maybe you want to sit down and go to Works and have an expensive version of the burger. So they're selling the same thing, but they're differentiated. And as a result, you can charge different prices. B, there is free entry and exit. And what this means essentially is no barriers to entry. Barriers to entry commonly exist in a monopoly. This would prevent other firms from entering the market. So in a perfect competition, firms can freely enter and exit the market. C is perfect information. So when there is asymmetric information, inefficiencies can exist in the market. An example of perfect information is like when you call an Uber, that Uber driver can see your rating and you can see that Uber driver's ratings. So you're not worried about something going wrong in the Uber if you can see that your Uber driver has driven 2,000 people and they have a 4.9 star rating. Similarly, the Uber driver isn't worried about you messing up their car if you've been in 100 Ubers and you have a strong rating. D is that all firms are price takers. And what that means is that they have no influence over the price. Kind of going back to the mushroom example from earlier, if everybody in this market is selling their mushrooms for $2 and a new firm tries to come in and sell a $4 version of the market, nobody's going to buy it. So as a result, they have to charge market price. What else do we have here? There are many buyers and sellers. I.e., this isn't some, very niche product that there are only a few buyers and sellers of. Many buyers and sellers. And lastly, there are no transaction costs. Another thing transaction costs come up in are the Coase theorem. And the Coase theorem states that if property rights are assigned, you can reach an efficient outcome. However, if there are transaction costs, for example, if the two people had to get lawyers to argue over who deserved what, then you would no longer be able to reach an efficient outcome. So these are the characteristics of perfect competition. I'm going to draw the long run graph here. So we've got quantity on the x-axis and price on the y-axis, and price, or the demand curve, is going to be flat. And this is because all firms are price takers. We're going to have our, swing and a miss. We're going to have our average total cost, and the industry as a whole is going to produce where the marginal cost equals the average total cost equals the demand. So we've got Q star here and P here. I think that's probably it. Let me look through. Yeah, I think that's really all I have to say on that. So, say good answer, that's correct. And with that, we can move on to question 5. What is the definition of the law of demand? And what Janine The Tutor has written is that according to the law of demand, none of the things remain constant. The price of the product and the quantity demanded by the consumers have an inverse relationship. When the price of the product increases, the quantity demanded decreases. Similarly, when the price of the product decreases, the quantity demanded increases. The demand curve is the graphical representation of the demand schedule, which shows the changes in price and the corresponding changes in the quantity demanded of the product. And that's a very good write-up. I'm just going to show you guys graphically here. So we can draw quantity on the x-axis and price on the y-axis. And we've got two things, supply and demand. And of course, where supply meets demand, we have our Q star, aka our equilibrium quantity, and our P star, our equilibrium price. And of course, this point is equilibrium. Just to illustrate this point a little better, I'm going to get rid of the supply curve and just show the demand curve here. And again, the law of demand is when other things remain constant, the price of the product and the quantity demanded the consumers have is an inverse relationship. I'm just going to illustrate that here. If we've got a very high price, we'll call that P1, then we're going to see consumers are not going to demand a lot of the product. You've got Q1 down here. So although the price is very high, not much of it's being sold. Similarly, with a very low price, a lot of units are going to be sold at Q2 here, but the price is low at P2. So that's how this line illustrates the law of demand. As the quantity increases, as the price decreases, the quantity demanded increases. As the price increases, the quantity demanded falls. We can move on to question 6 now. Question 6 reads, what is the formula for the marginal product of labor? And the marginal product of labor is the change in the output when labor has been added. The formula can be expressed as follows, change in Y over change in L, where the numerator is the change in output and denominator is the change in labor. So we've got the marginal product of labor and change in Y is going to equal output. This is usually on a macro scale, so you can think of output as GDP. And the denominator is going to be the change in labor, or the number of people in the workforce. So what the marginal product of labor can be conceptualized as the increase in output from adding one more unit of labor. Just take a picture of that. I'll drink some water. I don't really think I have anything else to add to that one. So I'm going to say and with that, we can move on to question 7. We've got what is a binding price ceiling? So a price ceiling is an effort by the government to control the prices of goods and services sold in the market. And a price ceiling on good controls the maximum price that can be charged by suppliers, and this allows the good to remain affordable. In perfect competition, forces of demand and supply influence the price of the goods. When demand for a good increases, the price of the good rises to adjust to demand levels. The rising price influences sellers to supply more of the good, and at the same time, demand of the good falls, I would assume. Eventually, the equilibrium price is reached where demand is equal to supply. A binding price ceiling is when the price control is set below the equilibrium price. For example, the equilibrium price for a studio apartment is $3,000. At this price, 30 studio houses are available, and 30 studio houses are demanded. Hence, demand equals supply for a studio house of $3,000, aka we're in equilibrium in that market. But if the government sets a price ceiling for studio houses at $2,000, this means that the maximum price a supplier can charge for a house is $2,000. Price ceiling at $2,000 is less than the equilibrium price of $3,000. Thus, a $2,000 price ceiling on a studio houses is a binding price ceiling. Binding price ceilings can lead to the development of an underground economy, like a black market. When a binding price ceiling exists, demand for the good is greater than the available supply for the good, and hence a black market develops to supply the good. For instance, in the studio rent market at a $2,000 price ceiling, 45 people demand studio houses, but the quantity supplied is just 20 houses. This means that 25 people would not be able to obtain a house from the market, and thus an underground economy develops to supply houses for those who cannot get a house on the market. That is a very well done explanation. I'm probably just going to add some graphs to it to help you guys visualize what this market looks like. So we essentially start off drawing this like any other market. We've got Q on the x-axis, P on the y-axis, and we've got our equilibrium quantity denoted Q star. And we've got our equilibrium price. We will denote that P star. And what they were touching on here is if we've got our equilibrium quantity and price here, and we set a price ceiling here, a price ceiling looks like a horizontal line. So if we set a price ceiling here, well, that doesn't matter because the equilibrium point is below it. So a price ceiling means that we can't have a price higher than what we've got here. So this would be an example of a price ceiling that isn't binding. What our junior tutor was getting at is what happens when there is a price floor. So when there's a price floor, or sorry, a price ceiling that is below equilibrium, that means the highest price we can set is this line here, even though the equilibrium price would have been up here. So I can get rid of the equilibrium bit here. And I can instead show you what happens in this scenario. So the price ceiling is going to cross the demand curve once and the supply curve once. Where it crosses the demand curve, we've got quantity demanded. And where it crosses the supply curve, we've got quantity supplied. Now in this case, our quantity demanded is more than our quantity supplied. So we have a shortage. This is what our junior tutor was getting at in that example. Maybe, so at equilibrium, they were saying that the price was $3,000. And as a result, we sold 30 studio houses. So in this case, our equilibrium price was $3,000, and our equilibrium quantity was 30. Now we've got this price ceiling that has been set at $2,000. All right, and at this $2,000 price ceiling, there are 45 people demanding studio houses. So QD is going to equal 45. And we get that from seeing where the price ceiling here, this horizontal line, crosses the demand curve, which is downward sloping here. and we draw down to the x-axis. So that's 45. And at this point where supply curve, the upward sloping one, crosses the horizontal price curve, we see that 20 people. So there are 20 houses being supplied and 45 people demanding houses at this lower price. So as a result, the shortage is going to equal the quantity demanded, 45, minus the quantity supplied of 20. And we have shortage of 25 houses. And this is a scenario where a black market may develop. So I'll give you guys a second to take a picture of that, and then I will illustrate a price floor as well. Okay, gonna move on here. So next we can draw, I erased way too much of that. Next we can draw a scenario where there's a price floor. So again, supply slopes upwards, demand slopes downwards. Now if we set a price floor down here, so a price floor, sorry, this should be a straight line. Price floor means that's the cheapest a good should be. That won't matter because the equilibrium point is above it. But if we set a price floor above the equilibrium point, this means that they must charge at least this much for the good. So again, we're going to look at where this horizontal price line crosses both the demand curve and the supply curve. So our QD is going to be on the left side in this case, and our QS would be on the right side. And at this price, this would be a surplus because we've only got, say, this time around, I don't know, 15 people demanding, yeah, you know what, we'll keep this same example going. So this would be the 30 houses that we just talked about, and the equilibrium price was 3,000. But now the government says, like, housing cannot go for less than 4,500. Us poor millennials are priced out in the market. As a result, the quantity demanded is going to fall because a lot of people can't afford this new high price. And the quantity supplied is going to increase. So now maybe there's only 15 people demanding housing at this huge price. But there's going to be all these houses, say 45, that are oversupplied. So in this case, a surplus would equal the 45 supplied minus the 15 demanded to equal 30. Technically, those numbers should sum the same ones from the other example. I don't think they do because I was just making up as I went. So you'll have to forgive me. Give you guys a second to take a picture of that. And we can move on here to question 8. Marginal product of labor formula. Did I not just do this? So nobody did a couple of questions ago. Regardless, here we've got our junior tutors written that the change in TP over the change in variable resource, which is labor. TP refers to total production. If there's an increase in production following the employment of one more laborer, then the firm is said to benefit from the marginal product of labor. However, the increase in production is dependent on other factors of production, such as capital, land, and entrepreneurship. The firm does not have enough capital or resources. Employing one more person will not increase production because the employee cannot use the other factors of production to increase the firm's output. What they're referring to in the latter half of this is Cobb-Douglas production function, which you may have seen in undergrad, and we'll definitely spend some time with in grad school. It's a macroeconomic model that you can make pretty complex with a ton of inputs, much too complex for the stream. So I'm just going to rewrite what I believe I had written earlier. Marginal product of labor is going to equal, they've got change in TP, I've written change in Y, total production, Y is for output. Regardless, we're talking GDP for a nation, an industry, whatever, divided by the change in labor. And I'm again going to write what I wrote earlier in case OneClass cuts these videos separately. So I'm going to say that the marginal product of labor is the additional output that arises from an additional unit of labor. So there are diminishing marginal returns to labor, like with most things. So if you are at a, in a scenario where you only have 2 workers doing all the work and you add a 3rd worker to the mix, it's likely that your output is your production is going to increase quite a bit, because you've just increased your workforce by 50%. When we are talking about an economy with, 10 million people, and you add 1 person to that 10 million people economy, there is going to be less of an increase in output than there was in the scenario where there was only 2 people. That is diminishing marginal returns of labor. So we can move on from that. On to question 9 here. I think there's 12 or 13 questions, so I am a good chunk of the way through here. I already did something similar to this too. Using numbers, explain how a market demand curve is derived from 2 individual demand curves. Individual demand curve is a graphical demonstration of the negative relationship between price and quantity demanded as stipulated by the law of demand. Market demand is the horizontal summation of individual demand curves. It is derived by summing all the quantities demanded by each consumer at each respective prices. Numerical derivation. Suppose there are 2 consumers in the market for good A, consumer 1 and consumer 2. Because of the different preferences and tastes of these consumers, their demand for good A is different. Thus, the quantities demanded by each consumer is shown in the table below. So we're going to have demand curve 1, demand curve 2. And of course, we're going to have Q on one axis and P on another. This is actually good because I can do it with numbers this time. So quantities, there is 0, 1, 2, and 3. And for the second consumer, it's only consuming 1 and 2. So we're going to say consumer 1 and consumer 2. And prices go from 0 to 3. So for this first consumer, when the quantity is 0, the price is, sorry, when the quantity is 3, the demand, let me try that again. When the price is 0, the quantity demanded is 3. When the price is 1, the quantity demanded is 2. Price is 2, quantity demanded is 1. And price is 3, quantity demanded is 0. So their demand curve is going to look like this. For consumer 2, when the price is 2, quantity demanded is 0. When it is 1, quantity demanded is 1. And when it is 2, it is 0. So their demand curve is going to look like this. Looking at the above table, market demand will be derived by adding quantities of A, demanded by consumer 1, and consumer 2 at each price. For example, at price 0, total quantity demanded is 3 plus 2 equals 5. Doing the procedure in the table will yield. So if we're going to sum these two demand curves, C1 plus C2 is going to equal market demand. So we've got Q and P again. So price is again going to go 0, 1, 2, 3. We can have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So at a price of 3, consumer 1 demanded 0 of the good, and consumer 2 demanded 0 of the good. So the market quantity is 0. At a price of 2, consumer 1 demanded 1 of the good, right here. We can see that the Q is 1 and the P is 2. And consumer 2 demanded 0 of the good. So at a price of 2, market quantity demanded is going to be 1. Similarly, at a price of 1, it's going to be demand of 3. And at a price of 0, it's going to be a demand of 5. So we end up with this kink demand curve because we've got 2 individuals that we're adding to make the market demand curve. It's a very good write-up by our junior tutor. Well done. Let me accentuate this. That is very large. You get the gist of it. If you guys a second to take a picture, we can move forward. Question 9. Define cyclical unemployment. In our junior tutor is written, cyclical unemployment is defined as when there is unemployment due to change in the phase of the business cycle for an economy from the peak towards recession. It is a result of a fall in demand in the economy due to which there is, pardon me, it's a result of a fall in demand in the economy due to which there is reduced production and hence laying off of workers. And that's correct. There are 4 types of unemployment, or at least 4 main types. We have First, we can talk about cyclical, as in the answer. So cyclical, you can essentially remember that it is reflective of the economy. In booms, periods where unemployment rates are low, output is high, people are confident spending their money, there is a lower, obviously, amount of unemployment. And in busts, say during recessions, you can think the 2008 financial crisis, or more recently, the pandemic that we're in the middle of, there's going to be increased unemployment. So cyclical moves with the booms and busts of the economy. We've got seasonal. And seasonal is how it sounds. Unemployment due to seasonal reasons. You can think somebody that works as a snowplow driver only has a job half the year because they're not working in the summer, or maybe a farmer whose crops can only grow in the winter. So seasonal, say due to, it's just from seasonal industries. There is frictional unemployment. And these are people that are in between jobs. So some examples of that might be you pack up and move to a new city. You haven't found a job yet. You are frictionally unemployed. Another example might be student that has just graduated and has not yet found work. They would be frictionally unemployed as well. Let's say that you are in between jobs. And lastly, we've got structural unemployment. And structural unemployment happens when there is a demographic mismatch of some sort. So for example, maybe there are jobs hiring in your city and they are all tech jobs, but you are looking for a job, but you're 60 years old with no tech skills. You're probably not going to be considered for the job, even though you're unemployed and there are jobs available. I don't think there's anything else I have to add to those. That sums it up. I think I got like 2 or 3 more questions here, and then I'm out of here. Question 11, what does market clearing price mean? And what our junior tutor has written is that the market clearing price is obtained when the quantity supply of a product, is equal to the quantity demand of that product. Therefore, market clearing price is also called the equilibrium price. I'll just draw that graphically real quick. Quantity on the x-axis and price on the y-axis. We have our supply sloping upwards and our demand sloping downwards, point where they meet. It's going to be the equilibrium quantity. It's going to produce the equilibrium quantity, and the equilibrium price, otherwise known as the market clearing price. If we go back to our housing example from a couple of questions ago, and we said that the price was $3,000, at equilibrium, and the quantity was 30. It is called the market clearing price because at this price, $3,000, there's a supply of 30 houses, and there's a demand for 30 houses. So the 30 houses are sold at $3,000 each to the 30 consumers demanding them, and the market is clear. There are no more houses for sale. Question 12. Define elasticity in economics. Elasticity is the degree of responsiveness of one variable with respect to another. In the real world, elasticity is the degree of responsiveness of a consumer or producer through demand or supply with respect to factors like price of goods, income, etc. If a good is highly sensitive, then it would have a high elasticity, and vice versa. This would mean a small change in one variable will bring about a large change in another, and so on. So we went through cross-price elasticity earlier. I can maybe give the elasticity of demand. So that is the percent change in quantity demanded over the percent change in price. Similarly, we've got the elasticity of supply. That looks like the percent change. Try that again. Again, I use delta here to denote change. That's the triangle. And change in quantity supplied over the percent change in price. Another one is income elasticity. What that looks like is the percent change in quantity demanded over the percent change in income. And again, if elasticity is greater than 1, we can say that it is elastic. And as our junior tutor said, when something is elastic, it is highly responsive to a change in the denominator. We can have an elasticity equal to 1. And that's what we call unit elastic. That means that if there's a change in the denominator, say for the elasticity of demand, there's a change in price. The change in quantity demanded moves proportionally with that change in price. Lastly, we can have an elasticity that is less than 1. And we would call that inelastic. And that is when the numerator is not responsive to a change in the denominator or insensitive. So again, moving it back to elasticity of demand, if there's a change in price, you're still going to buy it regardless. There's not a big change in the quantity demanded. So an example of like inelastic goods might be food. If you go to the grocery store and the price of everything is twice as much as it was last time, you're human, you still need to eat, you're probably still going to buy it. And yeah, something that is maybe a little more elastic might be like video games. They're more of a luxury. So if the game you wanted to buy changes from like $80 and it's now $200, you're probably going to not buy that game anymore. All right, that might be it. Oh, looks like I got one more. 13. And 13 reads, unemployment would cause an economy to A, produce outside its production possibilities frontier, B, produce inside its production possibilities frontier, or C, produce on its production possibility frontier. D, all the above. For junior tutors written that the answer is B, produce inside its production possibilities frontier. And they've written that unemployment implies underutilization of resources, and a PPF is drawn on the assumption that there's a full and efficient utilization of resources. Hence, unemployment will lead to an economy operating inside the PPF. And that's correct. I will just chart this quickly. So a production possibilities frontier shows the different allocations of two goods. So you'll have one good on the x-axis, one good on the y-axis. I'm not feeling very creative right now, so I will say apples on the x-axis. And oranges on the y-axis. So when you draw a production possibilities frontier, it is a bowed out curve like this. And there are three kind of potential style of points on a PPF. So at point A, inside the PPF, we can say that goods at point A, the combination of goods at point A, are attainable. But they are inefficient. So say at point A, you can have like one apple and two oranges. That is certainly attainable, but you can still move all the way to the production possibilities frontier. So for example, without giving up any apples, you could have instead had like, I don't know, 6 oranges. So points B and C, points that are on the production possibilities frontier, are points that we call Pareto efficient or technically efficient. And what that means, Pareto efficiency, is a state where you cannot make somebody better off without making somebody else worse off. So for example, we're at point B and we've got 6 oranges and 1 apple. If we want more apples, we can have it. I'll call this point C here. If we want more apples, we can have it, but it's going to involve giving up some oranges. So we could instead move to point C as a consumer. And at point C, maybe we can have 4 apples, but as a result, we had to give up 4 oranges and move from having 6 oranges to 2 oranges. Lastly is point D. This is outside the production possibilities frontier. And point D is preferable to points B and C. If you look at point D there, you might get, I'll actually draw this quick. Point D, you'd get like, let's say 3 apples and 8 oranges, which is preferable to both points B and C, but it's unattainable because it is outside of the production possibilities frontier. Maybe you get more money or prices of apples and oranges drop. That would be a shift outward of the production possibilities frontier. Maybe you could have it then. Or in this case, if we're talking about an economy, in the case of unemployment, like the question asked, that would result in shrinking of the production possibilities frontier. So the production possibilities frontier is drawn on the assumption that there's full and efficient utilization of resources. If there isn't, then it would cause it to shrink inwards, maybe like this. Production possibilities frontier would shrink in, and then points B and C would become as point D is, where it is preferable to the options, but is unattainable. So I'm going to say, I think that should be it here. Looks like it is. Yeah, so thank you for watching. This has been Kevin from OneClass. If you liked the video, I think you can hit the like button below. If you wanted to ask some questions, I believe there's a link below this that you can click on to ask questions. This has been Kevin from OneClass. Thank you for watching.